Picture yourself in a high-pressure meeting. Everyone is speaking, asserting their ideas, debating, trying to dominate the room. But there's one person who doesn't say a word. They're not disinterested. They're watching, listening, waiting. As time passes, something subtle happens. The loudest voices start to lose clarity. They overshare. They reveal their insecurities. They expose more than they realize. And the quiet one? He walks away with knowledge, advantage, and power. You see, silence isn't passivity. It's presence. It's control. But here's the question. Do you truly know when to speak and when to remain silent? Or are you, like most people, falling into the trap of saying too much, too soon, without even realizing it? We live in a world where attention is everything, where people equate visibility with value. In this world, the one who masters silence doesn't just stand out, they become untouchable. Most people fear silence. They rush to fill the void. But silence is a tool, a weapon even, that when used with intention can earn you respect, sharpen your influence, and shield you from manipulation. To understand the real power of silence, we have to go back, far back. Not to theories or abstract ideas, but to real history. Some of the greatest minds and most influential leaders didn't lead with words. They led with their silence, with the way they withheld, waited, and let others move first. Because those who speak too soon often reveal too much. But those who master the art of holding back, they move through the world with a different kind of gravity. Take Julius Caesar, one of the most brilliant military minds of ancient Rome. During his campaigns, he rarely shared his full plans with anyone, not even his closest officers. His strategy was simple: keep the enemy guessing, let them show their hand first. Only then, strike with precision. This wasn't indecision, it was discipline, and it led to victory after victory. His silence wasn't a void, it was a calculated force of uncertainty, a psychological edge. Now zoom into the present. Imagine a high-stakes boardroom, or even a creative team meeting. Have you noticed that the ones who speak the least are often the ones people pay the most attention to? When they finally open their mouth, the room goes quiet. Why? Because they don't waste words. They observe. They read the room. They learn. And then, when they speak, everyone listens. Not because they're louder, but because their silence gave their words weight. Machiavelli understood this dynamic better than anyone. In The Prince, he writes something chillingly precise. Men must either be pampered or annihilated, for they can avenge slight injuries, but not serious ones. In other words, never expose yourself halfway. Never offer half-truths just to be polite. If you must speak, speak with total awareness. Otherwise, silence is often the safer move. One of the biggest mistakes people make when trying to influence others is thinking they need to constantly be heard. But the truth? Silence has a psychological power few recognize. When you pause, when you withdraw your voice, something happens. The other person begins to feel the need to fill the space, and in doing so, they often reveal far more than they intended. Their fears, their doubts, their motives. Silence makes people uncomfortable, and discomfort breeds exposure. That's because we are conditioned to fear silence. In a conversation, when a pause lingers, most people panic. They feel the need to jump in, to explain, to say something. But the first one to break that silence usually gives the most away. Elite negotiators know this. They'll ask a question, and then just wait. No follow-up, no filler, just pure, intense, focused silence. And 9 times out of 10, the person across the table will overcompensate, spilling insights, weaknesses, leverage. Think about your own life. How many times have you hurt your position by over-talking? Maybe in a job interview, maybe during an argument with someone close to you. maybe while trying to prove yourself to someone who didn't even ask. You explained more than you needed. You filled in blanks no one requested. And afterward, you wondered, why did I say all that? That's the trap. The reflex to speak is so deeply ingrained, we often hand over our power before realizing we ever had it. Machiavelli knew that influence isn't about dominating a conversation. It's about mastering the flow of it. And silence is one of the few tools that can shift the emotional momentum of any interaction. It creates an aura of mystery. It invites projection, and it makes others hesitate. Because when someone doesn't show all their cards, people become unsure, curious, even intimidated. And that uncertainty is leverage. Here's a challenge for you. In your next important conversation, test this. Speak less, pause longer, resist the temptation to explain or correct. Just wait. You'll be amazed at what happens. People will lean in. They'll start trying to read your silence. They'll fill the void with guesses, confessions, overcompensations. And all the while, you're gathering information, sharpening your position, commanding the space without raising your voice. This is not silence as withdrawal. This is silence as strategy, as spiritual presence, as psychological dominance. The world doesn't teach this kind of power. But those who learn it, those who use it, never walk into a room unnoticed again. Silence is not just a concept, it's an art. And like any true art, it demands mastery. You don't just avoid speaking, you choose not to speak. You craft your silence with intention. Knowing when to hold back becomes a form of presence. Knowing when to stay still becomes a form of action. Silence isn't just not talking, it's speaking with your absence. In politics, in business, in relationships, the spoken word can be a liability if it's not measured. Words without calculation open doors you don't mean to open. They give others access to parts of you they didn't earn. But silence? Silence can build walls. Invisible, unbreakable walls. It protects, it cloaks, it confuses. And if used wisely, it leads. But here's the nuance. Silence should never feel like emptiness. It should carry meaning. It should hum with energy. Because silence without depth feels cold or indifferent. True silence, strategic silence, is rich with purpose. And there are ways to make sure it speaks louder than any sentence ever could. Let's start with something simple, the pause. One of the most underrated psychological techniques. When someone speaks without pause, their words blur, their message fades. But when someone speaks and then stops, lets the silence breathe, their words land, they settle, they echo. That pause adds weight, even to the lightest phrase. Great orators know this instinctively. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, didn't rush. He let silence carry his message. Between each phrase, he paused, not because he forgot what to say, but because he understood the gravity of timing. And those moments of stillness? That's when his words truly penetrated. But silence isn't just for speeches. It's even more powerful in the everyday. Imagine someone asks you a pointed question, a challenge, a provocation. Instead of reacting instantly, you stop. You look them in the eye. You wait. The silence creates tension, and that tension makes the other person think twice. Sometimes they soften. Sometimes they confess. Sometimes they unravel. You don't need to raise your voice to win a confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Just stillness. Presence. Machiavelli believed this deeply. He observed that the one who rushes to explain, to defend, to justify, reveals weakness, because justification carries the scent of guilt, even when there is none. This is why, in political debates, you'll often see weaker candidates pushing their opponents to speak, to respond, to react. But the most seasoned minds know, the moment you fall into that trap, you've lost control. Silence in those moments becomes a shield. It reflects the pressure back onto the attacker. It makes them look desperate, unstable, like they're arguing with a ghost. This tactic isn't just for the world stage. It works at work, in family settings, in friendships, in arguments that want to suck you in. The moment you feel the urge to prove yourself, pause, breathe, say nothing. Watch how the dynamic shifts. The other person starts to press harder, revealing their own anxiety. And you remain grounded. One of the strangest effects of silence is that it creates a vacuum. And most people cannot stand vacuums. When a void appears in a conversation, the other person has to fill it. They become uncomfortable with the stillness, and in trying to escape it, they often talk more than they planned. And the more they talk, the more they expose. Negotiators know this well. The golden rule: whoever speaks first loses. You make your offer and then shut up. Don't explain. Don't justify. Just wait. Let the silence settle into the room. The other person will feel the pressure, and that pressure leads them to fold, to reveal, or to reposition. And just like that, you win without force. The same applies to personal conversations. When someone tries to manipulate you, provoke you, bait you, silence becomes your line of defense. You don't give them the reaction they want. You don't let them steer the dialogue. You stand still. You make them navigate around you. The deeper truth? Silence is control, not just over others, but over yourself. Talking is often a reflex, a need to connect, a desire to be understood. But when you transcend that need, when you can sit in silence without discomfort, you've reached a rare kind of inner power, one that no one can take from you. Machiavelli taught that a true leader is master of his emotions. And silence, more than any tactic, reveals emotional sovereignty. Because the moment you break your own silence out of insecurity, you've given your power away. But if you can hold it, if you can breathe through the tension, something shifts. People feel it. They lean in. They listen. Silence is magnetic. It draws attention by doing the opposite of what everyone else does. It creates presence through absence. It turns what you don't say into a form of dominance. Because sometimes, the most powerful messages are the ones that never leave your lips. The person who masters this doesn't just avoid traps. They lead conversations without speaking. They disarm threats without engaging. They command respect without asking for it. Because silence, when mastered, becomes a force, a weapon, a mirror, a throne. And that brings us to the final question. How do you take everything we've uncovered about silence and use it to completely change how others perceive you? That's what we'll explore in the final chapter. Because once you embrace this truth, that silence is not weakness but wisdom, you'll never approach a conversation the same way again. There's something unsettling about silence. It confronts us. It lingers. It creates tension without raising a voice. And in a world where everyone competes to be heard, the one who chooses silence gains a different kind of influence. One that cannot be faked, rushed, or ignored. Machiavelli knew this intimately. He saw that true power doesn't reside in how much you say, but in how deliberate you are with your presence. The most powerful leaders in history weren't the ones who talked endlessly. They were the ones who knew exactly when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Influence, after all, is not about volume. It's about precision, about timing, about control. So now the question is, what do you do with all this? How do you take this invisible force, this silent strength, and bring it into your real life? The answer doesn't lie in technique alone. It requires a new way of seeing yourself, a new way of being in the world, one where your presence carries weight, even when you say nothing at all. From childhood, we're taught to explain ourselves. Why did you do that? Say you're sorry. Justify your choices. This pattern becomes automatic. We grow into adults who feel compelled to respond, defend, elaborate, often to people who never truly listened in the first place. But here's the truth. The person who doesn't need to justify himself holds the upper hand. Because self-assurance doesn't beg to be understood. When you stop trying to be constantly understood, you begin to radiate a quiet authority, the kind that doesn't seek approval, the kind that commands it. Silence becomes more than a lack of noise. It becomes a signal, a declaration, a boundary. It tells others, I know who I am. I don't need to prove it. Think about the moments when someone's silence unsettled you. Maybe they didn't answer right away. Maybe they didn't react as expected. And suddenly, your mind raced. You projected. You wondered. You adjusted your approach. That's the power of silence. It turns the mirror back on the other person. And that mirror reveals far more than words ever could. When you master this, something changes inside. Your perception sharpens. Your awareness deepens. You start to notice things others miss: tone, hesitations, micro-expressions. While others rush to speak, you learn to listen, to wait, to gather. Because silence isn't stillness, it's active observation. In heated discussions, the person who stays quiet the longest often wins. They spot the weaknesses. They stay centered while others spiral. And when they do speak, it cuts through the noise like a blade. Not because it's loud, but because it's earned. Silence prepares you to respond with precision, rather than just react out of emotion. There's another secret most people miss. Silence exposes. Not you, but the other. In any conversation, the one who talks the most is often the one who reveals the most. Their insecurities, their motives, their contradictions. Silence becomes a kind of passive interrogation, a space where others unknowingly hand over their truth. Try it. In your next conversation, hold back. Let them talk. Let them reveal. Let them fill the space with what they think you want to hear. And you'll notice, they'll show you who they really are, without you having to ask a single thing. That's not manipulation. That's mastery. In the theater of communication, silence is the most elegant act, and the most disarming, because it makes others reach for certainty. And in reaching, they often stumble. You, however, remain still, calm, unreadable, powerful. So now let me ask you the final question, the one Machiavelli himself might have whispered to a student. Are you in control of your words, or are your words in control of you? Because those who speak without awareness hand over their power, one sentence at a time. But those who hold their tongue, those who wait, observe, and choose when to reveal, shape the world around them without ever shouting. So the next time you feel the urge to speak, pause, observe. Watch what happens when you don't fill the space. Watch how the room bends toward you, and if this idea struck a chord with you, if you've ever felt the magnetic force of silence in your life, share your story in the comments. Let this be a space where fewer words mean more, where presence speaks louder than volume. And remember, silence is not absence. Silence is awareness, waiting to be heard.